Good morning. Welcome to the Lean Agile roundtable. Sorry, it's very early, and we're going to talk about a very hard topic, so hang on. So we're here to talk about Lean and Agile and understand the relationship between the two. We often hear questions about, are Agile and Lean the same? Are they different? Should I do one or the other? One before the other? In this session, we will focus on one particular case of an IT organization that has been deploying, practicing Agile for 2 years, and that now wonders, should I start doing also Lean IT? What for? Or why not? To explore these questions, we have this great panel of speakers, which I will introduce now. So, starting from Pierre Pezziardi. so Pierre, you're a thought leader in convivial computing. You were the CIO of a French bank where you empowered people, and you're the founder of a crowdfunding service. Next, we have Steve Bell, who's author of 3 books about Lean IT. You were awarded the Shingo Prize, and in addition to coaching companies, you co-founded Lean for NGO to make accessible Lean also to non-governmental organizations. Then we have Hakan Forss. You're a Lean Agile coach. You have more than 15 years of experience in IT, and you introduced Toyota Kata to the Agile community using Lego. Yeah, that's cool. Next, we have Mike Orzen. You have been practicing Lean IT for more than 10 years. You were awarded the Shingo Prize, and you deployed Lean both in IT, but also in non-IT environments. Like Michael Balle, you are author of several books about Lean, including 2 novels. You were awarded 2 Shingo Prizes, and you're the co-founder of Projet Lean Enterprise and Institut Lean France. Dan Jones, author of the most influential books about Lean, awarded several Shingo Prizes, and founder and chairman of the Lean Enterprise Academy in the UK. Then Régis Medina, pioneer in France of both Agile and Lean, co-author of the first French book about Agile, and also the first French book about Lean IT, and board member of the Institut Lean France. Laurent Bossavit, you're founder of both the Agile France Association and the Institut Agile. You were awarded the Golden Pask Award for your contributions to the Agile community, and you're the co-inventor of the coding dojos and co-author of the first French book about Agile. And last but not least, Takashi Tanaka sensei, who worked for Toyota, where he developed several tools and processes for product development that became enterprise standards. He helped companies deploy the Toyota management system, and he developed several products for product development, embedding Lean thinking, including the digital Oobeya. Thank you all for being this early this morning. And myself, I'm Antoine Contal, a board member of the Agile France Association. I will be the moderator of this panel. So, let's get straight to the point. I'd like to hear from each of you, what's your take on the question, as a CIO or CTO of an organization that has been using Agile for, let's say, 2 years, should I adopt Lean? Why? Pierre, would you like to start?
Yeah, the why basically the agile methodology is focused on build activities, and the IT department is usually structured, you all know that, upon 2 activities, which is the build activities and the run activities. This is an old pattern, actually comes from the times when machine resources and data were very expensive, and we had to put dedicated people on that task at the run activities. And now it's no longer the case. Resources data centers are very cheap, but we still live in the old organizational pattern, which is build and run different teams. So when you do agile, basically, you improve the performance of the build teams. And of course, what becomes the bottleneck is the run teams. So you start thinking, and when you hear I say bottleneck, actually I would say conflicts. When there is a problem, there is usually conflicts between run and run people don't want the pace of change that build teams can create with agile methodologies, and they are legitimate in that they usually don't they fear incidents, so actually they don't have the same goal from the build teams. That's why you usually come to Lean, and with Lean you start thinking about global responsibility, and you think what we call DevOps. I mean, teams that are autonomous enough to build and run their own product.
Thank you.
I believe that when teams are practicing Lean and when teams are practicing Agile, if they're doing it in an authentic way, they're tapping into the same source and really the same fundamental principles. With that said, there are many organizations out there that are practicing Lean and or Agile in an inauthentic way, meaning focusing on the tools but not on the principles. And so if you stick to the core principles, thanks to Dan Jones here, the 5 principles, in my mind, the key is the value stream, which begins with the need of the customer and ends with the delivery of the value to the customer. And as Pierre just pointed out, that's what I think the significant value that the DevOps brings to the Agile conversation in the last few years, because it continues the value stream continuity all the way down to the customer through continuous delivery. But there are still many other organizational impediments that get in the way of Agile. The one that I've been looking at very strongly for years are the front-end impediments that the organizational governance, portfolio management, planning, and budgeting put in the way. If you have an entirely Lean and Agile organization, but with a broken governance and portfolio management process, you're very suboptimal.
The reason why I think I'm looking at Lean is and expanding kind of the Agile mindset is to expand IT outside of IT. I see it has to become a part of the bigger value stream and focus on the true business value and customer value. And therefore, I see the Lean thinking makes us part of the whole company instead of a functional silo of IT. And I see that there's a great overlap in terms of thinking and tools, both in Lean and Agile, but there are some that are not really overlapping, and I see some of those tools is very useful for kind of expanding the thinking outside of IT.
Thank you.
I think everything that's been said is quite accurate, but I think of 2 organizations. One rolled out Agile, the other one started with Lean, and the outcome of the 2, comparing the 2, was quite clear. The intent of Agile and the introduction of Agile basically created a factory within a factory with a production rate that did not match the rest of the value stream. So we've talked about the bottleneck, but it did something else. It actually created what IT does not need, and that is another subculture. So we now had yet another subculture within IT that had their own jargon and started to, shall I say, look down their nose at other portions of the organization because they felt that they had access to principles and practices that no one else shared. So actually, we had to go back and do some what the CIO called damage control. At another organization, very large organization that I'll talk about later today, we rolled out Lean first and then Agile, and we did not have that issue whatsoever.
I'm not sure what to say because after Steve's presentation yesterday, great talk, I kindled the book, the Halo Effect, and I think we can all go home because because nothing works except be talented and be lucky. For those of us like you who are neither, and like myself who are neither, and we have to work, we have to pretend some of these things work, so I really don't think you should mix. From my work with CIOs all the way down to the operator, it's a very personal journey. And what actually tends to work are neither the principles nor the tools, but the practice and the tradition of knowledge that is carried over by these tools and principles. So one thing that I've been hearing all day yesterday is cherry picking. Because it is a personal journey, people look around and they say, oh, I like that bit of Lean and I like that bit of Agile, and I'll do something. And it's a free world. And according to the halo effect, you're just as likely to succeed or fail doing anything else. But in doing this, you lose the tradition of knowledge that goes with the field. So I'd be very cautious in the cherry picking, because there are many things about it. I'm not so familiar with Agile. I'll talk about, I've had to learn about it from necessity. But certainly in Lean, you can't do Lean without a pull system. You can't do Lean without being interested in the operator. Many people do, because they pick the interesting parts for them of Lean and think, ooh, I like that. And then something happens to them. Not that we see many of these cases, right, Dan?
I'm not so familiar with the details of Agile, but I do recognize, as I said yesterday, Agile as being a really well-intentioned intent to carve out a space in traditional Taylorist organizations where developers feel freer to express themselves and to be productive. And I think that's great. It's a noble. It was a noble intent. As I said, the same autonomous work team initiative was in Scandinavia, in Volvo, Uddevalla, and so on and so forth. Long story. That actually got rolled over, and we were part of rolling over that experiment when we came along with the Toyota as a reference model, based upon the practice, the daily practice of the scientific method. And I think the true definition of Kaizen from the Toyota reference model is that we learn to think, to act our way into a new way of behaving and thinking through the daily practice of using the scientific method. So I think the enduring strength of Lean is that it focuses on personal development of capabilities through practice. And there's a long, coherent tradition, but particularly a reference model that we can go back to. The reference model is changing and evolving itself, and we have a question of whether we go back to the current models that exist within Toyota or the original reference model, and that's a debate we have in the Lean community. But I think why Lean has in a sense shone and continued to grow is because it has that reference model, and because every time we go back, every time we struggle against a barrier or of understanding where what we think should work doesn't work, we can go back and ask the senseis, and the senseis, they breathe in and say, now you're asking that question. So you've got to that point in your journey, and they come back not with the answer, but with another question, which forces you to go on thinking. That is invaluable, and I think is the strength of Lean. Having said that, as Toyota is open to a lot of new thinking, what was developed in the software world as an answer to the software world's problem of surviving in Taylorist organizations, I think is certainly of interest. I was not aware that people had taken Agile into a whole across the whole of the organization. I think that's very interesting. I'm curious to know what insights they've come up with in doing that. But it's very clear to me that one of the major issues we all face, in addition to the personal practice of Lean, is actually the ability to work across functions all along the value stream, and across traditions, and across tribes, and across languages, and so on. So unless Agile can infect all of the other functions in the business, Agile will remain a tribe. And that, I think, would be a shame. I think we share an awful lot, and we should learn both ways about each other, and truly experiment with different synthesis of that in different organizations, because Lean is absolutely situational. And it's not a prescriptive model. It's a framework for developing capabilities to solve specific business problems. And so actually, the answer is it depends. It depends on the problem you're trying to crack, whether you choose waterfall or agile or whatever. And that's indeed exactly what Pierre Pezziardi said in his post, that we use all of them in Toyota to solve different kinds of problems. So I think that's why wisdom for all of us. So I'm very interested in the expansion of Agile to an enterprise-wide movement. I'm really interested to follow that and see. But I'm also interested to experience thinking about building an organization from scratch. So, you know, the Lean Startup movement, because actually what we're doing in most big existing organizations is trying to adapt the superstructure that Taylorism built. And what we should be doing is asking the question, what management do we actually need to support the value creation process? And it's much less management than we have currently. How much management and leadership do we actually need? And I think the Lean Startup world can start from a different direction and start questioning that. So I'm very, very interested, and I'm really grateful to be dragged both into the IT community, which I never believed I would get dragged into, and into Lean Startup, because it brings different perspectives and opens up new sets of questions. So I'm really grateful for the other movements that, you know, Scrum. I'm sure there's lots that I don't even know about. There are a lot of people in the Lean community that are really dedicated to preserving Lean, yes, against all others, including Michael. There are a few of us who are also intellectually curious and interested in other parallel movements. Now he is interested as well. He's interested as well, absolutely. But so I think this kind of cross-fertilization is really good.
Thank you. My take on this Agile and Lean topic is that it's a simplification, but you can consider Agile as a good process, excellent process. I've had great results with that. But succeed, you will not need only tools and processes. What you need is people who know how to use them to succeed. And the way I see the Lean versus Agile debate today is seeing Agile once again as an excellent process, an excellent series of principles, but Lean as a way, as a structured way to develop the capabilities of people to understand what's the purpose of this, to connect that to what the company needs, to understand how even software development fits with the rest of the organization. And so for me, this distinction between Agile and Lean remains really important if we want to keep that part of Lean, which is about developing people's capabilities.
I'd like to say that I'm currently working as an Agile coach. That's my official title, Agile coach, within a large telco, which I will not name so that I can discuss specific problems. And it's pretty much in the situation that Antoine outlined. It's been using Scrum for a few years now, and I was brought in ostensibly as an Agile coach, but for some reason I found myself inspired by Hakan's masterful marketing of the Toyota Kata approach. And to me, felt like something that fit in that organization. That was very much a contextual decision. I might have decided on something else depending on what I found, what the problems to solve were. So in that, I agree with what's been said before. But I do have a slightly different take on the difference between Agile and Lean. I think of both as being specific outlooks which direct your attention to different things. And they are compatible and complementary. And to me, the main difference is that Agile directs you to, well, famously the phrase is embracing change. And there are various ways to interpret that, but I think Agile is turns out to be, in many cases, about empowering people to renegotiate agreements, and that's its specific strength. Whereas Lean, to me, is more about confronting reality, and that has, to me, and in my situation, has been its specific strength. It's a relentless focus on understanding how things actually work and deriving solutions from that. And clearly, those two stances are not mutually exclusive. So I would say if you are in a similar situation, yes, add to your toolkit and try to make the best of both outlooks.
Well, yeah, before starting, I think this question, Lean IT or Agile, I think what we have to accomplish, that's first. So, for example, like very short term, we have to deliver one product, means we have to use a Lean IT, like integration for embedded software development, hardware, software, electric. So this is Agile, very complicated, right? And second question is, if what we have to accomplish, like a long term, like a human development, means Pierre said like a team building. So means inside of Agile, instead of pair coding, like a morning meeting, we have to focus team buildings. So I think Dan said perfectly, which kind of problem, so depend on the problem, what we have to solve. So in Lean, even Agile, inside there's many different practical techniques. So we have to select that ways. So I think that's the words, jargons. Thank you.
So I'd like to talk more about the people aspect, especially because I've heard some Agile developers talking about how Agile promotes a nurturing, pleasant work environment where people feel appreciated, and they fear that practicing Lean for them would be depressing. So, Mike, you were talking about a subculture and that there was some damage control to be done. What would be your advice for the CIO?
I think there may be a misunderstanding of Lean if he believes or she believes that Lean would be somehow depressing. If we think about it, the Toyota Way is built on two pillars. And those pillars are continuous improvement and respect for the individual. So in Lean environments that I've seen, effective environments, it really is about beginning new types of what I like to call ideal behavior. And ideal behavior, as Dan just described, is being a scientist, thinking like a scientist, basing our next step on the evidence before us. And the idea that that approach, that level of honesty, which can sometimes be kind of in-your-face honesty, would somehow degrade somebody or demean them or treat them without respect, I just don't think that's appropriate. So really, in what I would call genuine Lean environments, that openness and that respect is so great that people experience the same kind of, I guess, teamwork and joy and collaboration that I've seen in Agile teams. One Agile team that I worked with, several people commented that in their career, it was the first time they felt comfortable sharing ideas with their team. So Dan talked about Taylorism. I think we spend so much energy saying what we think the boss wants to hear that we really don't look at reality or ask ourselves, how do we add value? What's getting in our way of that? How can we limit variation in the work that we're doing? And typically, all of that is based on truth. And that level of talking with the truth is very respectful to people. And I don't think it should be perceived as something that should threaten people or make them uncomfortable.
Thank you. Oh. Michael?
In the example I'm going to talk about later, if you're still here, we had embedded software in a machine, and we had an agile fanatic running the software team, and he left. It went well. I mean, he's still subcontracting for the company, but he left. And the reason he left is that, as I'll mention, we start focus on product stability as opposed to product development doing bells and whistles. So I think that you're absolutely correct in what you said. These are different perspectives and outlooks. So I completely understand the feeling that these people have, because I've lived through it, that the bringing the lean vision of the hard truth from the customer feedback, it was nothing to do with the spirit of the team or how the team functioned. It was deeper than that. It was the intent of the person and what they wanted to do. And this agile group was using all the methodologies, but the truth is they were developing what they wanted to develop. And when we came to them and said, well, sorry guys, can we stop it with the new developments? And can we stabilize the developments we have so that the customers are less unhappy? It happened over a period of time. It happened over 2 years. But in the end, we saw that it couldn't, well, the guy just left. So it's tricky.
I think at the root of this, there's a fear that creative people have, both of sharing, but actually the fear is that if we standardize, that we're going to kill creativity. And the mistaken belief is that we're going to standardize everything. What we're actually going to do is we're going to take the unnecessary routine repeat work that actually gets in the way of creativity, and we're going to standardize and simplify and take the hassle out of that. And that has a big impact on the customer, actually, by the way. But in doing that, actually the experience is that this frees up time for creativity. And you can't tell people that. People have to experience it for themselves. And so while people have this fear, it's a genuine fear, because they fear that, okay, you streamline and standardize the routine, the rest of the time that you've freed up is going to be taken away from them. And that, of course, would be the classic Taylorist response. And immediately, if that happens, the process stops. And so managers, if they're still managers, have to understand that that's the quid pro quo for standardizing and stabilizing and having an impact on the customer, is that also we're going to actually use that freed up time to do additional things that actually are the source of the fulfillment and the feeling valued in the work. So I think that's at the root cause of a lot of the fears of genuine behavior that they've observed repeatedly in Taylorist organizations, where basically, thank you very much for saving that time and that effort. We'll take that from you. Yes. And that immediately cuts the collaboration, immediately cuts teamwork and so on, which is why I believe that even if you create a space in a Taylorist organization where you can do all the nice agile things, it can only go so far, because actually at the end of the day we've got customers, and actually at the end of the day the rest of the organization actually has to operate in the same way, and doesn't. And so that's why I think Lean brings a different perspective. It should bring a business-focused perspective, right from the top, right across end to end, right down to the individual capability development. So it's a business system that arises out of a reference model, not arises out of a fear of how a Taylorist organization would constrain my work experience. So I think that's a very fundamental experience that people can experience in a lean organization, is that the freeing up of the time by standardizing actually creates that opportunity for greater creativity. And you can test that out both in the initial reaction of the managers, but also by asking people, do they want to go back? Do they want to go back to all that rework and all that unnecessary hassle? And of course, they will say, you're kidding, you know? And so you've actually, what you've done is you've infected them with what I would call a benign infection of lean. It really is a benign infection. You begin to think in a totally different way, and there is no antidote. So you go and do this somewhere.
Thank you. Steve, you wanted to add something?
When Dan talks about the Taylorist organization, the typical pattern of human behavior in Taylor is, I'm the manager, I know more than you, I tell you what to do and you do it, and I will reward you or punish you accordingly. In the lean model of behavior, it is, I'm here to help you learn to do your job better and to learn how the job is done better each and every day. And at the heart of that is the scientific method, how people learn. And embedded in that is the PDCA cycle, the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. Embedded in the Agile method is also the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. The best example I can give is in the Scrum way of practicing. It is the retrospective. A lean person would call it a reflection. Someone from Toyota might call it a Hansei. But at the end of every cycle, whether it's a daily stand-up or a sprint cycle or a release cycle, the team steps back and says two things. They say, how did the product go, and what can we do to make the product better in the next cycle? And then how did the process go, and how can we make the process better in the next cycle? And if the team is truly interested, has a shared intent, a purpose of improving both the product and the process for realizing the product in every cycle, then coming to grips with the impediments, the problems that are getting in the way of those two things should not be fearful. Yes, there will be wicked problems that are not easy to solve, but they are not people problems, they are product and process problems. And the technique that Lean has refined over the years is the A3 problem-solving process, which is basically a codification of the PDCA methodology. And I think I can speak for Scrum and to say that Jeff Sutherland, the co-creator of Scrum, now, whenever Jeff teaches Scrum at any level in any organization, he teaches A3 because he realizes that A3 is the embodiment of process, of problem solving. And if you use that method and you embed that within the retrospective, teams will achieve their goals.
Laurent?
I'd like to share an anecdote from the field to illustrate some of what's been discussed. I'm working with that group I mentioned, which still has, although they've been doing Agile and Scrum for a few years now, a somewhat siloed organization. By which I mean there are separate functional groups, product owners, QA people, developers, and so on. So, and one very valid criticism at this point would be to say that they're not fully agile, insofar as they are still siloed. But I think that that's probably also a function of the size of the group. But anyway, they are using retrospectives, which is the agile tool for continuous improvement. I would very much say that the point is not to focus on the techniques and on the tools, it's to focus on the content, what gets said in those discussions. And as I was listening in on those retrospectives, one pattern which became apparent to me was that a lot of the time people were blaming very general problems and issues for their stuckness. You might say that their continued plateauing at a specific level of performance. And so what I would hear was, we would love to improve, but really it's this other team's problem. It's the other guys. One thing I did at that point, which seemed to start a little improvement, was to ask people not at any time in the retrospectives to discuss generalities. I told them we are only able to work on a problem or an issue if we have a specific concrete instance of it. And so I didn't actually use the formal A3 tool, but I think in my own small way I was trying to apply the lean mindset by saying, give me concrete instances of problems, not the problems themselves. And strangely enough, the actual occurrences, the number of actual occurrences reported were much less than what you would have expected if you had taken at face value, the generalizations. To address the original question, I would dispute that Lean has a focus on problems. I would say again that Lean has a focus on reality, but it can be very depressing for a team to truly believe that their problems stem from origin completely outside their control, and that's what was happening in this agile team. Instead, if you say, it is in my power to do something, I can investigate, I can track a problem, try to look for root causes, for the exact mechanism, then you're doing something, you're playing detective, you're playing scientist, anyway, doing something with your brain, and that's empowering.
Yeah, Pierre?
Yeah, to go over what Laurent says, I had the same point of view, and where I was doing agile things, techniques or lean techniques, I always the bottleneck at the end of the day is always a maturity problem, a psychological fact that we have not learned at school to recognize that we failed, and today when you manage people and you will say to people this is bad, and the person will hear I am bad. He has not the maturity to hear this is bad, cool, let's improve it. And that's my current bottleneck with people, because we have not this culture of this, just discussing that.
Yep.
Here's a funny thing that happens to me on the Gemba. I have this reputation from very, very tough on people. The thing is, I've watched the studies. There are some people, not good for you married people out in the room, but some people study married couples, and they can tell in 90 seconds how long the marriage is going to last. It's interesting study, and one of the key things they listen for is signs of putting down the other person. And the one thing they found is that people can get in very tough arguments in the couple, but that doesn't tell you anything. What tells you something is the ratio of positive to negative comments. And so this is what I do in the Gemba all the time. I agree with people on most things all the time. I count a ratio of 3 to 5 in order to be finally saying, are you sure about this? Or to disagree with somebody. But I think you probably have the same experience. People simply don't hear it. Now, one of the difficulties we have with lean people who are not in that, they only, when they try to do lean, they only take the negatives. They don't do all this groundwork of building the relationship with the positive. And then it becomes truly horrible. It's really hateful because they only do the negatives. But I completely agree with Pierre that we have a difficulty with here. I love your statement that it's not I am bad as opposed to this is bad. Because no matter how much efforts you say to comfort people, say yes, 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 yes. No. You know, all they hear is the no.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about one thing which is very dear for agile teams. It's the self-organization. And Dan, you were talking about the autonomous teams you've seen. And from what I hear from CIO, the question that they have is, okay, I have this autonomous / self-organizing team, but I also have middle managers. What is the role or place in this new kind of organization? Dan, do you have some insights to share?
I'm not sure. I think the self-organizing team is the self-organizing nature of the team is a defense mechanism, and often is in conflict with the true needs of the rest of the organization as to what to do in what sequence. And partly the rest of the organization has not expressed very clearly the nature of the problem they want solved. And that's this whole question about risk and defining the specifications. And I think we need to do, from the Agile world, from the IT world, we need to do a lot more experiments to improve that process. So we are clear about the specifications. And so therefore the team itself will choose the right things to do. So I think the self-organizing nature is nice and necessary when you're protecting yourself in a terrorist organization, but it misses the point. And in the self-organizing teams in Scandinavia, in Uddevalla, and so on, it proved the long work cycles they had showed that actually everybody was doing things their own way, and they were enjoying doing them different ways, and there was very little clarity about what actually the steps were, and there's very little stability and standardization of the output. And so actually it was fine for the workers for a while, but in fact along comes a method that actually specifies the problem and the requirements very clearly, engages teams in meeting those in a way that makes the work content very, very clear in small work increments with very frequent ability to see progress and plan versus actual, that achieves levels of performance that are twice or three times more effective. So I fear that the same thing might happen to the Agile movement. I think that's probably the need to protect yourself if you're embedded in an organization that is also going lean, is less. So therefore, the other attributes of Agile become relevant and become the focus. And the self-organizing protection, I think, is not the focus anymore. It is the initial focus. I totally understand that, but I think in the end, the ability to see the work, the ability to identify the standardizable routine activities and to improve the productivity, and connect the purpose with the results and feedback from the results. I think that will result in an order of magnitude more effective outcomes.
Do we have a question from the public?
Sure did. From Cécile Dijoux here.
Hi, gentlemen. Thank you very much for the panel. How would you explain that Lean Startup succeeded in propagating Lean culture amongst Agile community in 1 year, while Lean never succeeded in 20?
Good question. I'm the Lean Startup reference. I don't know if what you say is true. How many Lean startups have you seen? What I say is, we're doing Lean or Agile. You can do tools or you can do change in the culture. And I see many people doing Lean tools. They're doing accurate value stream maps, but they don't have the maturity to change their culture, question themselves, ask problems. So the change toward Lean is a change in the culture, and the change in culture takes time. If I asked you to change something that you've been doing for years, like the way you grow your child or something like this, you were doing A, now you should be doing B, which is far better. This would be very uneasy for you, and this change in the culture takes a lot of time in large organization, and in small organizations like Lean startups, it sometimes happens, but sometimes, I mean, and sometimes in Lean startups in mine as well, you have low maturity people with whom you can't talk about problems, and if you can't talk about problems, it's just the beginning of being Lean. So I don't see it this way really. There are this maturity concern about our collective ability to talk about problems, and we have all the same problems in small or large corporates.
Can we stop talking about culture and let's focus a bit about people? I mean, it's not these things are not structural. We're not in the Marxist world anymore. There's one guy called Eric Ries who's full of peps and energy, who took a concept that somebody else came up with, and he made a following out of it, and through sheer energy and will and leadership. And the real question we have, I think, in the movement is how come Eric didn't come to us or come from us? Which is the real question, I think, that is posed behind the question, is what is our capacity as a movement to have Eric Ries? And the real question is, would Dan Jones and Jim Womack, as young people seeing this thing in Toyota, would have joined the Lean movement as it is now?
Good question. Look, Eric has touched a nerve, and I think we were lucky when we came up with Lean thinking. It met the need. It resonated with the need in society at the moment, and so it actually, you know, there were a lot of managers seeing their business really under threat, and seeing this as an explanation that helped them understand how their business was under threat and began to help them do something about it. So I think the truth is that most management ideas, going right back to Taylor, actually are successful because they resonate with a perceived need or a need to justify a set of behaviors. It is not the inherent nature of the argument, it's actually whether they fitted the needs of the time. And now you have the top idea from Harvard Business School is Christensen's innovative. You know, we all got to innovate, and everything's going to be, you know, wonderful. And there's you know, California and big data coming back up at us. You know, the snake oil salesmen are out there, and so you know, this meets the needs of understanding how you can be part of that. So the whole entrepreneurial community and the whole startups, Silicon Valley world, it's legitimizing, you know, big data as a good thing. And so there are dangers to it as well. But I think, you know, Eric's done a terrific job with his book, extremely well written, and really good, and it's engaging a whole new community. So I think there's terrific positives in it as well. But let's recognize the real success of books is there being in the right place at the right time. And he's saying the right message at the right time to engage the business schools that have nothing new to teach except entrepreneurship, whatever entrepreneurship is. And look, it's great. And, you know, so I'm one to absolutely to reach out, and that's why I've got involved in startup, because I can't engage in that discussion unless I have some experience. So I have to get involved and do something. And what you discover is actually, well, there's a hell of a lot more to startup than Eric talks about.
So time is running up. We have 3 interventions: Hakan, Régis, Steve. So Hakan, please.
So my take on this and some of the other things that we've been talking here is it's a language problem. So what Eric has done is to create great stories with another language, conveying the same message. And more or less the same message, right? Yeah. And I think this is the same with the question about agile teams fearing going into Lean. We use terms like standardization. If we look at IT, standardization means everything should look the same. So, and that's not the question for in Lean. And so there's many of these language barriers that creates an unnecessary conflict. So by bridging the gap of using the language of the people that you interact with and explaining the underlying principles and philosophy, it's much easier to get the buy-in. And what I think in my point of view, Eric is just pointing something out that has been in the IT industry and the rest of the industry for a very, very, very long time, but in a way that we can consume it.
I don't understand what you're saying. When you use your computer board to chaku on your Chorobiki, where's the problem?
Exactly. But of course, it's a great way to have all these pattern names because we can communicate much faster. But then you might need to create new pattern names for a new community. Yeah, but it's very true, and we build these kind of tribes with our language. So we want to expand it outside the tribe. Maybe we need to change the language or use Lego.
Thank you, Lego. Régis, last word?
Another way to look at this is to consider that these agile teams have built their own little world in the terrorist organization by sheer force. And at one point they say creating one's own startup is maybe an opportunity to go out of this, to flee this terrorist organization. So that's a strong appeal for agile teams also.
And last but not least,
and if I think I understand the point of Cecil's question and your point, when a spark becomes a conflagration overnight, the conditions have to be right. And there are many conditions that have come together just in the past few years. Of course, the internet, global teams, the fact that many organizations, the Googles and the Netflixes and the Salesforces of the world, are able to conduct thousands of experiments a day and get instantaneous feedback and act on what they've learned from those. The fact that the global economy of large companies, large organizations, may be quickly changing to the era of entrepreneurialism. And I'm not just talking about business entrepreneurs all over the country. The amazing thing, a few years ago, the iPhone came out, and suddenly thousands of kids are making millions of dollars, 99 cents at a click. How did that happen? The conditions had to exist. The same thing we're seeing in the developing world. Millions, hundreds of millions of micro-entrepreneurs are all lean startups because they have to be. Every day is an experiment. Where's my next meal coming from? Where am I going to sleep tonight? They're naturalists at it. And so I think the conditions were just right. But we have to get back to what the fundamental premise of lean startup is, which is rapid experiment. The faster you can validate the value hypothesis and move to a growth hypothesis or pivot and try again. Whether you're small, whether you're big, whether you're a 100-year-old company. If you're a 100-year-old company and you're not thinking this way, you're not going to be a 200-year-old company. So I think that's the fundamental message.
So time's up. Thank you for all these interesting discussions. So now you know that Agile and Lean are different, but the Agile community is looking at you, the Lean community, and we have a lot to learn from each other. Thank you very much.